my name is Siri Smith, and this is my action research presentation titled Roll with the Punches Using Role Play to Increase Willingness to Communicate in an Elementary Dual Language Immersion Classroom. Before getting into the problem and the research, it is important to have a context of where this research study was completed. This research study was completed at La Academia Dual Language Immersion School in Chaska, Minnesota, about 20 miles southwest of Minneapolis. In the class were 20 third grade students, 7 male, 13 female, 5 native Spanish speakers and 15 native English speakers, and 6 that identified as Hispanic and 14 that identified as white, not Hispanic. We looked next at the demographics of the school as a whole, noting that 58% of the school identified as white, 36.9% identified as Hispanic or Latino, 0.8% as Asian, 1% identified as Black or African American, and 3.3% as 2 or more. It is important to note that the demographics of my class in which the research was studied does not reflect very well the demographics of the school as a whole, as there were more students that identified as white and less that identified as Hispanic or Latino in my class. When looking at the problem, we need to understand a little bit more background about the setting of the school. In third grade, 70% of the day is taught and learned in Spanish, with math, Spanish language arts, science, and half of social studies all in Spanish, while the other 30% is taught and learned in English, with English language arts, the other half of social studies, and all the special electives classes. In understanding this, students were able to stay in Spanish during academic situations, but immediately went to English during group work and social situations. So this is the problem that I was hoping to find an answer to in this study. This led me to 2 research questions. The first stating, what impact does situational role play have on third grade dual language immersion students' ability to sustain target language using accurate language in spontaneous interactions over time? So if we break this down, we focus on the situational role play, which is the means by which we are going to be researching this. And this first question focuses then on how long they can stay in Spanish, in this case, and how accurate is that Spanish. When we look at the second question, it states, what impact does situational role play have on third grade dual language immersion students' willingness to communicate and sustain spontaneous interactions in the target language over time? So we're still focusing on those situational role play activities. This time, the focus in question 2 is on how willing to communicate are students in those conversations. In understanding the background behind this study, we look at 3 main factors, those being communicative language teaching, willingness to communicate, and role play. We look first at communicative language teaching, which Farzia defined in 2016, stating that communicative language teaching is communicating as much as possible in the second language, giving students daily opportunities to be using Spanish with their peers, in this case Spanish. In 2017, Metin Tekin said not only are you supposed to be communicating as much as possible, but using those real life situations that students will need to be able to use when they go out into the community. And then in 2005, Siri S said that there are 3 steps in this communicative language teaching. The first step being that it must include all 4 competencies of communication, those being grammatical, sociolinguistic, discursive, and strategic. Students cannot just be communicating to communicate, but there must be a focus on those 4 parts in that language as well. Siri S also stated that there must be interaction between peers in communicative language teaching, and it must be student-centered with their interests at the center of the teaching. We then look at willingness to communicate, which in 1998, McIntyre, Clement, Dorney, and Knowles defined as a readiness to enter into discourse at a particular time with a specific person or persons using the second language, meaning essentially that for students to be able to communicate with another person that language, they must be ready to do so. In 2014, Zaranabadi, Katabi, and Abdi broke this down and said that the willingness to communicate in a student can vary depending on setting and situation. So while one student may be willing to communicate in one situation, they might be unwilling to communicate in another. And then in 2017, Tavakoli and Davudi said that the interlocutor can also have an effect on willingness to communicate, meaning that with whom the person is speaking can really affect if they are going to be ready to enter into that discourse or not. And finally, we look at role play, which is the means by which we will be gathering data for this study. Becker and Roos in 2016 said that it can be very beneficial for students to creatively interact with the language. They must be given different opportunities to enjoy and interact using that language. In 2001, Freeman stated two different types of role play. The first being scripted, meaning that students are given a script or they write out a script and have the words with them prior to the role play, where they can read the words. Then the other type of role play is non-scripted, meaning that students are given a topic or a theme and they must come up with the words on the spot. That is the kind of role play that will be used in this study. Finally, in 2015, Naksavi and Singwansawat stated that although they didn't see a growth in their study in grammar and pronunciation, they did see an improvement in interactions, expressions, and fluency in the language. So before we talk about the intervention, we need to look at the timeline of the study. This study started the last week of September, where students completed a pre-questionnaire and a pre-conversation. The pre-questionnaire we will go over in a minute, but it was 10 short answer questions about how willing to communicate students are in specific conversations. The pre-conversation then was a 5-minute conversation with a partner about a specific topic in Spanish. For 7 weeks, the intervention took place where students participated in 14 situational role-played conversations with a variety of partners in the class. The week before Thanksgiving, students then completed a post-questionnaire, the same 10 questions as before, and then a post-conversation, another 5-minute conversation with a partner, with the same partner as the pre-conversation about a different topic. In December, the week before Christmas, students completed a delayed post-conversation, which was again another 5-minute conversation in Spanish with the same partner as the 2 others, focusing on a specific topic. Throughout the course of the study, I kept a teacher observation journal. In looking at the intervention, students were paired up with a variety of partners and situations and were given conversation cards every Tuesday and Thursday. On the conversation cards, there was one for Estudiante A and one for Estudiante B. In each card, it stated first who they were going to be role-playing in this situation. It stated how Estudiante A should start the conversation and how Estudiante B should continue, and then how Estudiante A should continue and how Estudiante B should continue. With this, they were expected to continue with the conversation. These cards were adapted from Kid World Citizen in 2018 so that there was a card for each partner and so that they were in Spanish. To gather data for the first research question, there was one part focusing on research, or focusing on length, and one part focusing on accuracy. This first research question focused on the pre, post, and delayed post conversations. So to begin, in the pre and post and delayed post conversation, students were paired with the same partner each time and were given a set of conversation cards such as this one. They then recorded the conversation on Flipgrid. Once the conversations were recorded, I listened and I measured how long they stayed in Spanish. So once they switched over to English, I stopped the timer in my listening. I then completed 2 paired t-tests. So we can see here in the graph that there were 10 groups and each group completed 3 conversations. In looking first at the pre and post conversation, we can see with the blue and the red that 7 of the 10 groups actually had a growth in length of conversation between the pre and the post. This leads us to a p-value of 0.097, meaning that this was tending towards statistical significance. Then we look at the pre and the delayed post conversation, which is the blue and the yellow, and we see that 6 of the 10 groups had a growth in length in conversation, while 4 had a decrease in length. This brings us to a p-value of 0.28, meaning that there was no statistical significance between the pre and the delayed post conversation. To analyze data on accuracy of Spanish, I use the interpersonal speaking rubric from the Ohio Department of Education. On here there are 3 categories of which to analyze. The first being comprehensibility, meaning focus on fluency and vocabulary. The second being interaction, focus on context or content. And the third being intercultural competence. This third part was not included in this study. Up top it has the 5 levels of performance, those being low, emerging, developing, good, and strong. To be able to analyze this data and complete a paired t-test, I gave each of those levels a numeric value, low being 1 and strong being 5. I then completed 2 paired t-tests here as well. In this graph, students are broken up from individuals 1 through 20. And if we look first at pre and post, which again is blue and red, we see that 12 of the 20 students stayed at the same average level of performance. In this example, in this first one, then 3 of 20 improved, while 5 of 20 had a decrease in their level of accuracy. This brings us to a p-value of 0.303, meaning there was no statistical significance here. We then look at the pre and delayed post, meaning the blue and the yellow, and we see that again 12 of 20 students stayed at the same level. This time, however, 5 of 20 improved, while 3 of 20 decreased their level of accuracy. So this brings us to a p-value of 0.104, meaning here there's very minimal statistical significance. Next, we look at research question 2, which was a pre and post questionnaire on willingness to communicate. This was a questionnaire from Cow and Phillip in 2006 that was adapted to be more appropriate for 3rd grade students. This was a questionnaire on a Likert scale, and as 3rd graders, this could be a little bit difficult. I made this so that all the questions were short answer. Each question asks, how do you feel speaking Spanish? And then gives a situation in which they would maybe need to speak Spanish. I then organized all of the answers. So first we have one of the questions. Then we have all of the answers from the pre-questionnaire, and then all of the answers from the post-questionnaire. First, then I looked at all of the pre-questionnaire answers and pulled out a few themes. Unfortunately, with the pre-questionnaire, many of the answers were short with little detail, such as that first dialogue blurb over there. Many answers were okay, good, or nervous. This made it difficult to pull out different themes. However, there were a few longer answers with more detail, so I was able to pull out 2 themes. The first being that students were more willing to communicate with fewer people. We see here in the second dialogue blurb as an answer to question 8, asking how willing a student would feel helping a student in Spanish. The student wrote, it's easy because it's one person. And then in the third dialogue blurb, we see here that one of the themes is that almost all of the students were willing to communicate with the teacher in Spanish. And this student wrote, happy because she will not laugh at me if I make a mistake. When we get into the post-questionnaire, there were many longer answers with more details, so I was able to pull out more themes. The first being that students were more willing to communicate if they knew the person. So we see here in the first dialogue blurb as an answer to question 1 about how do you feel speaking to a friend or speaking to someone in line in Spanish. The student wrote, fine, because they're my friends and I have known them since 1st or 2nd grade. In the second theme, I was able to pull out that students were more willing to communicate, again, with fewer people. This was the only theme that transferred over from the pre to the post questionnaire. And this student here wrote, as an answer to question 7, asking how they feel communicating in Spanish with 3 people. The student wrote, fine, because it doesn't matter a whole lot, it's just not a lot of people. The third theme here is that students were more willing to communicate if the other person speaks Spanish. And so we go back to the question about helping someone in Spanish. And this person says, great, because everyone knows Spanish and understands. One theme present in answers to every single question in the post questionnaire was that many students felt nervous speaking to certain people for fear of being made fun of. And this brings us back to Tavakoli and Davuti in 2017, when they stated that the interlocutor has a major effect on students' willingness to communicate. To triangulate the data, I kept a teacher observation journal throughout and found 4 themes. The first theme being that throughout the actual role play activities, there was more Spanish as the intervention went along. So in the first role play I wrote that some were talking in Spanish when they ended, but most were talking in English unless they were recording the video. And in the very last role play, I wrote that they are definitely talking much more in Spanish, successful in that way. So within the role play activities, more Spanish was being spoken as we went along. The second theme is that the amount of Spanish spoken depended on the topic. So we had a variety of difficulty levels in the topics, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in the limitations. The third theme is that when we were using Flipgrid, students were more engaged and more likely to complete the task. However, there was less Spanish being spoken while using Flipgrid than when not. And then finally, the last theme showed up 8 times throughout the course of the study in my observation journal. And the question asked, how do I get them to transfer over what they're doing in the videos and the role play into actual conversations with their peers? They automatically go to English during social conversations. So this was the problem at the beginning of the study, and it's clear that it was still present throughout the whole study. In looking at the results from the study, we go back to research question 1 on length and accuracy, and we noted throughout in the p-values that there was very minimal positive effect on accuracy and length of Spanish conversations. If we look just at the length, it increased during the study, however decreased after the study. It did not transfer over into daily social conversations, which is supported by Ludwig and Ludwig-Rower in 2013, who stated that although the length, the grammar, the vocabulary of the conversations may increase during activities, when the activity is done and they go back to their social conversations, it does not transfer over. And then finally, we look at accuracy, and we noted in the p-values that there was no growth during the study. However, there was stable or increased growth after the study, which we will talk a little bit more about in the limitations. For research question 2, we go back to the willingness to communicate questionnaire, and we note that the length and detail of responses increased between the pre and the post conversation, bringing me to believe that students became more aware of when and if they were using the Spanish throughout. They were able to articulate after why they were feeling the way they were feeling. The largest theme present here was that it depended with whom they were speaking, back to that the important effect of the interlocutor. And then finally, I do believe that the more opportunities students were given to communicate with a variety of people in a variety of situations and settings, that they were able to feel more comfortable and more confident with that. In looking at limitations, there were 3 present in this study. The first came from the use of Flipgrid. All of the students were recording in the same small space, and so for them it was distracting to hear the other conversations going on, and it was distracting for me to listen to the conversations later and analyze that data. In Flipgrid, you can only record for 5 minutes, so the conversations were cut off if students were continuing to speak in Spanish. And finally, Flipgrid is just not as authentic as face-to-face conversations, bringing in an aspect of pressure to perform and nervousness there. The second limitation came from the small sample size. As my class only had 20 students, I was not able to have an experimental and control group. This meant that in looking, for example, at the accuracy, we noted that it stabilized or increased after the study. There's no way of knowing if this was due to the role play conversations or if this was due to the natural progression of the school year and becoming more comfortable with one another and learning more Spanish. And finally, the final limitation was the topic on the situational role play cards. There were a variety of difficulties on the role play cards. For example, in one, students were asked to be a barista and a client and order food and drinks at a coffee shop. This is not a conversation that third grade students have often, and so this was a difficult conversation for them to wrap their minds around, compared to them being engineers and redesigning the classroom that we use every day. They were able to connect to this one and had ideas already in their mind that they were able to communicate about. In thinking about recommendations for other elementary dual language teachers, I recommend completing the willingness to communicate questionnaire multiple times throughout the year, and then working with that data and those themes as a whole class. Thinking about the themes in which students are more willing to communicate and less willing to communicate, and having conversations about that. I would modify the study and use it as a daily practice and morning meeting, starting the day with a 5 to 10 minute informal conversation in Spanish. And then I would complete more spontaneously, not using Flipgrid. In looking forward for myself, I will also plan to complete the willingness to communication questionnaire multiple times throughout the year and have those discussions with my class. When are we speaking more Spanish? When are we not? Why are we feeling this way? What can we do as a class to make it even more comfortable for students to speak in Spanish? I think by doing this will bring us to a place where we can have student goals and self-assessment throughout the week and the year, thinking about what are our goals for speaking Spanish and assessing ourselves on whether we met those goals or not. I plan to make this a daily practice with a student-generated list of topics. One of the limitations of this study is that the cards that I used had topics already pre-planned, and I think it would be beneficial to have students help me come up with those topics to ensure student-centered interest in these conversations. Finally, I plan to continue researching willingness to communicate in the elementary school classroom with that focus on social situations. Why are students comfortable speaking Spanish in math, but not when they go to their small groups? I think this will be beneficial in moving forward and understanding this in the classroom. Thank you so much for listening.